Okay, moving on to our theme today. This theme was chosen by our Oslo chapter. It's illustrated by David Stenmark, and it's presented by our global partner, MailChimp. So taboo. It's a tricky one. I saw a lot of people were kind of stumped on how to answer this question. Taboo is defined as a social or religious custom prohibiting or forbidding discussion of a particular practice or forbidding association with a particular person, place, or thing. In the last few months, I've been noticing on social media and other platforms, people being more and more willing to talk about taboo subjects openly. It started with all sides openly discussing strong political views, but I'm seeing it evolve. People are opening. They're opening up about private subjects like postpartum depression, divorce, suicide, mental health issues that I think has been unacceptable to talk about in the past. I don't know if it's our political climate or we're just getting over the perfection complex in our social feeds, but I think it's really important, and I think we should all support everyone who's willing to do that. I do know sharing these very human experiences in a powerful way, they connect us with others and remind us we're not alone. So be vulnerable with each other, like Caroline was with us last month, talking about moments. And you don't have to do it in a public forum. You don't have to get on stage. You don't have to even do it on your Instagram. But sit down and let your friends into your head. Life happens to all of us. Now on to our lovely speaker. Amal Iqbal is a fashion designer, an interior designer, and a graphic designer at Studio Fig, F-I-G. She studied fashion at FIDM and has a bachelor's in landscape architecture. Touring her tiny studio, you experience her art expressed in paper, fabric, wood, and metal. Somehow she pulls it all together and does it beautifully. Growing up a Muslim woman in the post-9/11 America, Amal is here to tell us her story of navigating societal and cultural taboos. Thank you for being here today. Please welcome Amal Iqbal.
Hi, guys. Hi. I am so excited and honored to be here. So much so that when I was asked, I cried. Anybody that knows me knows that I cry over anything. A good Apple commercial, someone telling me that they're proud of me, and now apparently an email. So for the past 3 years, the person that I talk to when I get super emotional is my husband. So I called him up and I'm like, CreativeMornings just asked me to speak. And of course, he's my devil's advocate and he goes, why are you crying? And I go, because as a Muslim American, it's incredibly rare to have these opportunities, and I'm incredibly, incredibly humbled and honored. So this is what these next maybe 25 minutes are going to be. I laugh and I cry, and that's what my world has been for as long as I can remember of being a Muslim American and navigating this world. And so before I start talking about what I went through, I want to let you guys know, as you probably know, that talking about taboos in itself is kind of taboo, right? And so when I'm about to share with you guys, you may or may not relate to it. And so what I encourage you to do is to maybe discover some of your own taboos and things that are worth exploring and questioning, and just be inspired by the people that are around you and the world that we live in today. So growing up, I grew up in Vacaville, which is just a couple cities over. My parents moved from Pakistan in the 1980s. And so I grew up as an American. That's how I saw myself. I didn't see that I was Pakistani or Muslim, just an American girl. Partly so because of my school, right? I went to school and I got to be normal. I got to be an American kid. I got to play sports and eat hot lunch and dress like the other kids. And then when I would come home, I got to be a Pakistani Muslim girl. You know, we ate my mom's food. Eating out was a very rare treat. We read the Quran together, learned how to pray, fasted as a family during the month of Ramadan, and that was normal too. And they never really conflicted with each other because One stayed at home and the other came at school. And that's how I lived my life until about the age of 8 or 9. And so the first taboo thing that I experienced is as a child of an immigrant, of parents who are immigrants, there's somehow this automatic thing that somehow if you defy your parents or you're disobedient, you're somehow being disrespectful of the sacrifice that they made of coming over and trying to provide a better life for you. I mean, how can I experience what they experienced with when I grew up here and they grew up there? So about at the age of 8 or 9, my mom, everything that I was doing, I was a gymnast. I got to be in gymnastics, and at that point, that was the goal of my life. And I was a huge tomboy, and so I'd run around in the field with boys, didn't really play with dolls, and I got to wear shorts and tank tops and just be me. And one day, my mom sat me down and she says, Amal, you're growing up, and these things that you used to do, you can't do anymore. And at that point, I didn't fight it because that was my world. It was like, okay, this is it. These were the teachings of Islam, that as I was growing up, I wasn't allowed to wear shorts and tank tops anymore. Minglings with boys was now considered taboo. And it was kind of because of the cultural part of it. It's so messy when I think about it and trying to delineate it. But my culture was telling me, you're respectful of your parents and you're do as you're told. So no problem. Even when I would go to school, my friends started noticing, like, aren't you hot? And I'd be like, yeah, but I just can't wear shorts anymore. Well, why? And I'd go home and I'd be like, why? And my parents would say, because just do as you're told. We don't talk about it. And that's how I grew up. You just don't talk about certain things. And what I've learned in preparing to talk to you guys is that that's how taboos are. Some of them are cultural, some of them are societal, and some of them we make up ourselves. They're kind of like superstitions. And that was one of those things that was taboo. Parents tell you to do something, you do it. And I was fine with it until about the age of 15. So when I was 15, it had already been about coming up on the first year of 9/11. And talk about taboo. My dad works for United Airlines. His birthday is 9/11, and he's a Pakistani Muslim. So when he came home that day, we were like, Dad, what's going on? And because in our culture and our family, we didn't talk about it. And now I've realized that I've never actually asked him how that impacted him. And now, at the age of 30, I look back and I wonder, the things that happened, who knows what he was going through, but because it was so taboo, we didn't talk about it as a family. Even to say the words, being a Muslim family, like we would come home and we would just hide in our shelter, and that was my life. And I remember one day waking up and my dad said, Amal, why do we pray 5 times a day? So in Islam, we pray 5 times a day. And what I've learned is that because we're told to. And my dad goes, okay, starting tomorrow, you're now going to cover your head. Wow. Sorry, guys. The reason I'm so emotional is because even 15 years later, it's still incredibly raw. And clearly I'm not over it. I felt that I had to decide who I was, and it wasn't my choice. And growing up as an American kid, you learn that you as a girl have just the same rights as guys, and you can do whatever you set your heart out to. And that's how it always had been. I always was pushing the boundaries. I was creative, I did sports, I did music, and now I was being told how to dress, and I wasn't ready for that. And I'd always been told by my parents that you can do whatever you want to do. And so now looking back at it, because of whatever taboos and things that my dad had to go through, it came from a place of love. And he was just trying to protect me, especially in the post-9/11 conditions. And so I did it. I started my sophomore year in high school, and I didn't tell any of my friends, and I showed up. And I knew now that I was different. I was the only Muslim girl in my school. And that's hard. But I did it. I persevered and I did it. But by not fighting by it, by just agreeing to pull into whatever taboos or whatever mindset my dad had. It ended up creating a lot of problems for me. Up until the age of 19, I found myself lying and rebelling really, really, really hard. And I wonder, if I would have just fought a little bit, if I didn't just do what I was told, could we have saved all the heartache that came many, many, many years after? And that's exactly what happened. At the age of 19, my dad could see that I was going down a path that he was not comfortable with, and that was that I was pulling away from Islam. And my mom said something, and she goes, "You're so American. You're behaving like an American." And I'm like, duh. I'm born and raised in California. What do you think was going to happen? And so that in their mindset, that it was so taboo that she was behaving as an American, was because they grew up in a different country. They didn't know that they could raise me as a Pakistani girl in America. How could they? They came with perceived notions. And it's so interesting that if we had talked about it, again, maybe a lot of things could have been avoided. And so my dad gave me two options. He said that I could either stay or I could leave. And at that moment, I knew I had to make a decision. And I knew that it wasn't a win-win. It was going to be taboo if I left the household, because the community, the Muslim community, my parents would have to face them and say, "Where's Amal now?" And they had to do that. Or I could continue to tell other people to fight for their dreams while I was bottling mine up inside and being really sad. So I took a gamble and I left. So I remember, and at this point I was still covering my head, and for the last 3 years or 4 years of my life, I never left the house without the hijab. That's what the head covering is called. And my dad said, "Only take with you what you've paid for." And so I remember putting down the house key, the cell phone, the credit card, and I put on my shoes, and I put on my sweatshirt, and I left. And always the question I get is where did you go? All my life, I've been really blessed to have people who have always supported me. And those people were never, unfortunately, Pakistani Muslims. They were Caucasian families, Christians, non-Muslims. And so I developed a really good relationship with some family friends that lived around the corner, and I knew that they were my safe haven. So I walked around the corner, and they already knew. They could see it. And so in our culture, you don't call people Mr. and Mrs. or by their first names. In our culture, you call them Uncle and Aunt. So Aunt Lori and Uncle Jim were my safe haven. And so they knew. And so they told me that as long as I needed to be there, I could be there. And I went through the trials of feeling abandoned, but I also knew that I needed to do something. And so I knew that I needed to continue with my education. So I decided that I needed to go to school. And so I enrolled in the community college. I actually enrolled in 2. I knew that from the situation that I needed to keep my options open, because I didn't know what I was going to face. Every single day I was taking these things and I didn't know what was going to happen. So I went to Solano Community College and I went to Diablo Valley College to pursue landscape architecture and architecture. And through my life, in order to deal with all of these cultural things that I was going through, the creative world was my safe haven. So I did music, I did the arts, and that was something that my family didn't get. And so I knew that this was the time to do it, because I didn't have that pressure. I had already disappointed them. They weren't sitting there watching me anymore. So I knew that this was the time to do it. So I did it. And I went to 2 schools for maybe 3 years, and it was incredible. And people were like, what are you doing? And I was just like, I need to create an environment for myself where I know that this is going to pay off, because in the end I felt like all I had was me. So while friends were out at that age doing things and partying and going out, I knew that I just needed to buckle down and go to school. And in that time it was considered taboo, right? My friends were like, "No, this is the time to have fun and party. You don't have your parents." And I was like, "No, this is what I need to do." So Solano Community College at that time had a thing where if you got C's and aboves, you could transfer to a UC. So I applied for architecture and landscape architecture at UC Berkeley and UC Davis, respectively. I didn't get into the architecture schools, but I did get into UC Davis at landscape architecture. At the time, in order to commute to both of the college, I'd gotten my first apartment, so I moved out to Davis, and that's when I landed in this beautiful, great Sacramento Valley. And I went through school. I remember it took me 4 years. So I graduated at the age of 25, which in itself felt so taboo to have been so older while my other classmates were so young. But I knew that I had persevered through the worst of it, so I just kept going. And I remember, so I'm at this point, so I'm in my senior year, and I was getting phone calls from my younger brother. If there was anything that I ever felt guilty about was leaving him. Everyone asked me, if you could go back and tell your dad again to either leave or stay, would you do it? Absolutely. Because I realized, one, I found my path back to Islam because I had to figure it out for myself. And two, I didn't know what was capable of me creatively if I didn't step out that door. I was on the path of becoming a doctor because that's what Muslim girls become. I would talk to my mom occasionally. I was in my sophomore year in college, and she goes, "Are you sure you don't want to become a doctor?" And I was like, "Mom, it's too late, and I don't know. Like, this is what I want to do." And she goes, "Okay." So I'm 23, and my brother calls, and he says, "Mom's not doing so well." And I said, "Okay." So I remember I made it up with her, and she goes, "I need you." And I was like, "I need you too. I'm a young adolescent. I'm a young kid. I need my mom." And she goes, "If you come home, we'll pretend like this never happened, and we won't talk about it." Until this day, that's exactly what it is. We don't talk about it. But I learned through that sometimes some taboo topics are meant to keep the peace. At one point, I needed to do something that was taboo to figure out who I was. But now at this point, when I did it and I figured out who I was, I knew I could do this for my mom. So I came home. And we didn't talk about it. We pretended like I'd been home the entire time. But I could see how everyone at some point had evolved. My sister was in the process of getting married, and I was about to finish college, and things with my dad weren't that great, but it was manageable. So I am about to finish college, and I'm interning at State Parks, which is off of One Capitol Mall, and I was really content and happy with my life. I was like, things are good. I'm getting an education. I'd been given a 2-year extension, and then I met a boy. And it was probably one of the best things that ever happened to me. So my husband at the time was Hindu. And I knew that we were going down not only a slippery path for me, but for him as well. If you guys know the history of India and Pakistan, Muslims and Hindus, it's not a really great one, unfortunately. And so my sister had gotten married, and we'd already been talking, and I was just like, we're gonna have to tell our parents. And he goes, "Yeah, I know." And so we both decided, and we picked a day, and we were thinking my parents were going to have a problem with it, and his would have been cool about it. So I came home, and Mom's like, "You're 24, it's time to get you married because a 24-year-old Muslim girl can't be married." And that was another taboo, and I was like, "Mom, I actually found someone." And she goes, "Oh, no." And she's like, "You're going to have to tell your dad." And I was like, "Can't you tell him?" And she goes, "Nope." So I remember I was all nervous like I am with you guys, and I'm sitting down on the sofa like at the edge, like ready to, bolt. And I'm like, "Dad, I met someone, and he's converted to Islam." And he goes, "Okay, cool, bring him by." So I was like, "That's it?" And he goes, "Yeah." I'm like, "Okay." So I ran upstairs, called my husband, and I was like, his name is Shri. I called Shri at the time, and I said, "My parents want to meet you." And he goes, "Oh." And I was like, "Did you tell your parents?" And he goes, "Yeah." He's like, "They're not ready for it." So now we had transferred my taboo-ness onto him. But I was like, it doesn't matter. I guess wherever I go, I bring taboo. I mean, my question literally says, "What taboo have you broken?" And I want to say, which ones haven't I broken? So we told our parents, and I believe that was in May of 2013. At the same time, I had gotten notice that my job at State Parks had been eliminated. And so in the landscape architecture program, I had already had a job, so I didn't competitively apply to other jobs like my other classmates did. So by the time I got the notice, I was finishing my senior thesis, and I was like, "Oh my goodness, what am I going to do?" So we're in the process of planning a wedding. I'm about to graduate. I don't have a job. It was mixed emotion feelings, which is typically how it's always been for me. I'm like a roller coaster. And so I remember we would go to the city for some inspiration and just to kind of lay low. And we passed by the Fashion Institute of Merchandise and Design. And Shri goes, You can't find any work. You've always wanted to do this. Why don't you go to school? And I was just like, what about my degree? And he goes, what about your degree? You have it, it's done. There is no, it's education. There's nothing wrong with pursuing it. So I applied, and I went to fashion school for a year. And we managed a long-distance a long-distance relationship and planning a wedding. And then at some point, and this is, no one in this room knows this, even the ones who know me, is that I actually didn't finish. There came to a point where I felt like I just needed to know that I could do this. And so I kind of did the taboo thing, and I left. And that was in August of 2013. I came home, planned the wedding, got married in December of 2013, and we moved back to the Sacramento area. So I remember I was looking for work, and it had been about 8 months, and Shree comes home one day, and I'm folding the laundry, and I'm literally sitting there folding laundry and crying, and I'm like, I'm not meant to be a housewife. And he goes, okay, we'll find you work, no worries. Like, we'll figure it out. Like, you don't have to do the laundry, I'll do the laundry. I'm like, okay. And that's when, at that point, I had started, because of my fashion degree, I wanted to keep my brain busy, as I started making clothes for clients one-on-one. And that was kind of what kept me. But other people would come over, and they'd be like, your apartment's really nice and styled, or do you do logo designs? And so that's when the idea of Studio Fig came up. And Shree goes, stop fighting it, just house it under one roof. And I was like, you studied architecture. You literally want me to do something so taboo as take 3 design fields and stick them under one roof? I'm saying that's taboo. And he goes, says who? And I was like, yeah, says who? So that's when the first Calling All Dreamers competition happened, and we applied, and we made it into the semifinals. And I knew that this is what I wanted to do. But if anybody out there owns their own business, running a business is expensive. And so I realized that I did need to go back to work, at least to fund my dream. So I was able to get a job with the local landscape architecture firm, and I was told that it was part-time, and I was like, yeah, this is gonna be great. I'm gonna work a couple hours here, and then it's gonna fuel my business, and it's gonna be great. My first week, I worked 55 hours. And I kept doing it. I did it for 2 years. Some days were 16 hours, and I was managing 2 full-time jobs. And I realized that I was killing myself, essentially. But I felt like if I quit my job that I had my degree for, that would be taboo. And I've started this business, and when I quit it, that's going to be taboo. But at some point, I wasn't happy anymore. And I finally came to the realization after we applied for the Calling All Dreamers competition this past year, and we made it into the finals, and I realized, you know what? This is what I need to do. And so I quit my job, we downsized, and I opened up a studio just about 6 weeks ago, and this is now my life. And it is still taboo every single day. My dad came to the opening, and I remember he walked in and he went, nice, and then left. And then my mom's coming with everything, more than like $200, and she has a $100 bill. She's like, can I take it all? And I'm like, of course, Mom, go ahead. And realizing for the first time, I didn't get caught up in the emotion of my dad, and I didn't get caught up in the emotion of my mom, and I realized that that's just how life is. It's nice and sweet and lovable, and it's nasty and ugly and grumpy, and that's just what it is. And so today, that is still my life. I'm still dealing with the repercussions and the consequences of leaving home. I'm still dealing with the consequences of marrying my husband and what we're dealing with as a family. And I'm dealing with the consequences of starting a business with very little funding and housing three designs under one field. People look at me and they're like, that's intense. And I'm like, yeah, it is, but I wouldn't trade it for the world. For the first time in my life, everything that I've gone through, all the taboos that I faced or haven't, or head-on headstrong, or I've now even created for myself, has made my life incredibly fulfillable. And that's what's so beautiful about it. And that's kind of where I'm at today. So I encourage you all, like I said when I started, to find your taboos and to question them and see, is this one worth keeping the peace? Is this one really needed anymore? And what in myself can I do to better myself? Thank you.